Hey, comics cubers. In September, Komiket from the Philippines organized the Philippine International Comics Festival, an online festival which will be live next year, but an online festival which included interviews with writers, artists, and various people from the comics community around the world. This December, I will be uploading the 3 interviews that I did on every Monday of the month. The first one is with the legendary Gene Ha, fresh off his work on Wonder Woman Historia. Awesome.
Glad to be here.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Gene, for joining us, and thank you to the PICOF attendees for being here and being present. We are encouraging you all to send your questions through the chat box. How are you doing, Gene?
I'm doing okay. It is beginning of it's late at night here and it's morning there. So hello to tomorrow. I am still in Thursday.
You're living in the future, Gene.
Oh no, you're living in my future.
Oh yeah, I'm living in the future, or you're time traveling into the future right now.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Give me stock tips.
Invest in the Comics Cube. Gene,
Well,
why do you love comic books?
oh, I mean, there's so many. I mean, like I love movies, I love TV, I love video. Well, actually, I don't love video games that much. But I love so much social media and animation. But most of these other visual storytelling forms take well hundreds of artists and huge corporate overseers and groups of people. Just it takes so many people, and it doesn't have an individual voice usually.
Mhm.
That voice gets drowned out a little bit. But in comics, you can have one creator or two creators or three creators, sometimes five. But all you need is one, and you can tell a really great story, which has a really distinctive voice with its own point of view. And there's not any other way there's no other visual storytelling that's that visual that can tell the kind of stories that comics can.
And when you were growing up, is there a particular comic that made you realize you wanted to make comics?
Oh, so many of them. I was a huge fan of artist Mike Grell. So weekend after this weekend, I'm going to Baltimore Comic Con, and he's going to be a guest of honor there. So it'll be fun. And I got to do a piece in honor of how he inspired me when I was in grade school and in high school. So I did a marker drawing for charity of his character John Sable.
On Table Freelance.
Yes, yeah,
Was it
wonderful character.
was it Mike Grell Warlord that you got you into it?
No, it was Green Lantern and Legion of Superheroes.
The
That's
Legion of
when I first
Superheroes
noticed
and
him.
Green Lantern, sci-fi stuff.
Yeah, and I had not discovered uh,
Neil
Neil
Adams.
Adams at that point.
Yeah.
So I thought Neil Adams was the Mike Grell imitator, not the artist who had inspired Mike Grell. So I was a Mike Grell fanboy.
As an artist, how do you feel about that when you realize that one of your idols was heavily based on someone else? Do you end up studying that original person?
Well, I mean, that's a really good example of me not appreciating a great artist until later in my life. So like Neil Adams, I didn't really read a lot of his stuff until I was in high school. I read Mike Grell when I was in grade school, so I thought Mike Grell is just this huge influence on me, and I didn't realize how much he influenced many later artists. Also, my the artist who's still my favorite artist today, Bill Sienkiewicz, was also somebody who studied the work of Neil Adams, was friends with him, and copied his style for quite a long time until he broke away and figured out his own style.
What is it that you take from somebody like Bill Sienkiewicz? Because you don't draw like Bill Sienkiewicz.
Oh, there's an important thing about Bill Sienkiewicz is the way he observes the world and then figures out new ways to represent it in comics. Like he studies a lot of American illustration, abstract designs, fine art, modern art, things like that. And then he figures out ways to integrate it into comics to tell comics better. But most importantly for me, the most important thing was the way he didn't try to, when he stopped studying Neil Adams, he began studying more real life, and he would draw people in subway stations while waiting for or on a train or at a restaurant. He would just study people all the time, and he figured out a way to take this life drawing style and put it into his comics. And he drew superheroes in a way which I'd never seen before, with facial expressions I've never seen before, because there tends to be very formulaic ways that comics represent things like anger or happiness or laughter.
Yes.
And he drew people with body postures and facial expressions that looked like real people I knew. This is especially inside of the New Mutants, when the New Mutants were still teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, wow, Neil Adams, not Neil Adams, Bill Sienkiewicz didn't start that book. I can't remember the name of that artist. A fabulous artist did, but they didn't look like real teenagers to me. And I didn't want to read that book. And then Bill Sienkiewicz came on board, and suddenly he's like, wait, I can tell these are the same characters, but now they look interesting to me. Now they look complex and beautifully drawn, and just in a way I've never seen before. And I want to follow this artist.
Let me paint a picture for people about New Mutants, and I wanted to get your thoughts on what it was like when you were there, right? When you were there reading it for the first time. Issue number 20 of New Mutants was introducing a character called the Demon Bear. It was drawn by the great Sal Buscema, who was an amazing storyteller, an amazing artist. But then he draws the Demon Bear as this, kind of cartoonish cloud bear. The very first page of the next issue, which is Bill Sienkiewicz's first issue, is this unbelievable illustrative demonic bear. And as somebody who was there at the time, how did that feel? Did that feel like there was a sea change in the way comics would be made?
I mean, all of Sienkiewicz's work at that time from that time kind of changed what I thought was possible in comics. I'd seen one painted graphic novel before then, Empire by Howard Chaykin of all people, but he never did anything else like that again. And then Bill Sienkiewicz came along and he drew the characters with these scratchy lines and with he made it graphic and dynamic, but he still made it look like people I knew. Then after that, of course, Bill Sienkiewicz went on to fully painted work. And again, and then he did it's a long series. It's like 8 very dense issues of painted work, and it just stays beautiful all the way throughout, which is very rare. Usually painted graphic novels start off strong and then get a little weaker if they're very detailed.
Talking Electro Assassin.
Yeah, Electro Assassin. It was and also by Bill Sienkiewicz. And he just kept on expanding what he showed was possible in American comics.
I'm going to skip ahead to a question and we can get away from talking about your favorite artist. But very recently, you posted a drawing of Jem and the Holograms, which
yes,
I got to say, Gene, isn't something that I thought I was going to see from a lot of people these days. And you got a comment there which says, one of your many skills, and I want to talk about the tools that you use. One of your many skills I love is your facility with markers. You use them in a way I've seen no one else use them, and your ability to nail value and tonal shifts with them is off the charts. That comment is from your favorite artist, Bill Sienkiewicz. Can you talk a little bit about receiving that comment, and what is your process with using markers in order to establish the mood?
Oh, you know what? I am working on a marker drawing right now. So right now I'm doing a picture of Captain America during World War II, talking with some French kids inside of a ruined town in France. And you can kind of see how
Yeah. Is that
and you can see the shirts. I don't have a lot of reference for this. Like Captain America's face is just drawn from, like, I've drawn a lot of square-jawed superhero faces. The kids are kind of based on some black and white photographs, but a collection of them of French children during World War II. Let me see. Yeah, it's just a lot of practice, just drawing with reference. And then if you draw something, I have my rule of thumb I give to people is that if you draw something the right way 10 times, using reference or without, just drawing the way you want it to draw, you don't need reference anymore. You don't need to kind of practice it. It'll just be in your head, and you just have to do it that many times. But you can see how I'm building up the values here, where I start from light to dark, and there's going to be very dark values inside that the scale shirt Captain America is wearing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not there yet. I'm avoiding the red because the red is very easy to smear. So I'm going to put that in the very last.
Little tips that newer artists would be good to know. Red is easy to smear.
Yeah. The thing about most markers are like this. Commercial art markers are like this, but I'm using Copics. I don't necessarily recommend any specific brand, but I like having the light colors. I'm going to show you some of the colors I have with me.
While you're doing that, we have a comment from Joshua Ferrolino saying that it's impressive.
Yeah. You'll see that a few of my markers in my pack have this thing where it says a normal color from a Copic. I don't know, if I'm saying Copic or Copic right. But anyway, then I have a half mark on it, which means it's a custom blend because it's hard to make the gradations I want in the lighter colors, especially using the typical Copic range. So then I take glass eyedropper bottles and I mix my own inks and put them into blank markers, which allows me to get some effects like the blue on the light blue on Captain America's shirt here is not a standard color because all the pale blues that Copic puts out are very saturated, super bright and jewel-like, and I don't want it to. I wanted a more muted light blue than that, so I mixed up my own.
And I think it's super impressive how you do a different blue for the lines on the scales for Captain America.
Yeah,
you're still showing every scale there.
Yeah, and if you look at the light part of the scale, even that's the lightest blue that I use. That's a custom mix. Then I have a medium blue on top of that, and then a darker blue, and then I'm going to go in with probably a dark cool gray to get in the very dark shadows on top of that.
This particular this particular webinar is entitled Storytelling with and Without Collaborators, and the reason for that is because you have worked with some amazing storytellers, but you've also been in the process of putting out your own creator-owned work. So talking about storytelling, because it's very clear just from the start of this webinar that you are a very accomplished illustrator, but the aspect of storytelling when it comes to comics, what is it that you think our audience, people who are trying to make comics, maybe some for the first time, should know about comic book storytelling before they even start?
I mean, if I'm going to, this is a very American focused way of talking about it. I worship the storytelling of Will Eisner, who's it's like every country or every major region of the world that has a comic books tradition, a major comic book tradition, has the artist who brought in cinematic storytelling. So Europe has their the Tintin, which brought that in. I can't remember his name. The guy who created like the White Lion and Astro Boy in Japan, Tezuka. Osamu Tezuka. Yeah, he's the one who really introduced cinematic storytelling to Japan. And inside the United States, it was Will Eisner. And his viewpoint on storytelling is that every element should be important, but it shouldn't be repeated elements. And if you look at a lot of old American comic books, even long after Will Eisner had shown everyone the way on how to do it, there will tend to be actions along the lines of a caption that says, and then a shot rang out. And then you have a picture of a man shooting another man, and the guy with the gun says, "I'm shooting you, you lousy rat." And then the other guy says, "Ow, I've been shot." And then there's, of course, the image of the shooting. And there's this kind of belt and suspenders viewpoint in American comics of nobody trusts anybody else to get the story across. So we keep on repeating how this storytelling is doing in every way possible. Dialogue, captions, images, and so on. In really elegant Eisner-style storytelling, you only have to explain the fact once. You don't have to say I'm being shot, you just show it. And the visuals and the words should work together. And they should be, now, you might say that they should be complementary, that one helps the other. But the point where I think it gets really, really interesting is when one fights the other. And that's where you get layers of meaning. I brought my iPad over here available so I can show you.
Feels like you've worked with a couple of writers that do that a lot.
Oh yeah. This is the page, one of the pages from Bill Sienkiewicz that really blew me away. And I bought the original, but it's in the basement right now. I didn't bring it up. I wasn't sure if I'd need it. But you
Go
can just
ahead.
see how it's, yeah, it's, I'd never seen someone draw superheroes like this. Like the way he drew Nightcrawler. Everyone else drew Nightcrawler like he had on black face paint on his cheeks in a specific pattern. And no matter what the lighting, those shadows would always show up on his face. And this was the first time I realized, oh, those aren't markings on his face. That's just how they're representing that his face is dark. And then Bill Sienkiewicz just drew Nightcrawler as a person with dark skin. And it was like, oh. And it's just the subtlety of just like drawing heroism and superheroes who have doubt and that look like they're having doubt, and they don't have, it's not the cartoony way of representing doubt. He actually drew how actual people look when they're nervous and unsure, and just, good Lord, I'm just the way he's drawing, like the body language from behind of Cannonball looking nervous.
Yeah.
No one
He
else
would
had
do
ever done
this,
that in
yeah.
comics.
Be
Yeah,
like,
no one had done that in comics. And to represent a person from behind and showing they're nervous with that kind of body language so subtly, in which it's someone hiding the fact that they're nervous.
that's true.
It's, you know, like, this could be a lot of things, but in this case, just the subtleties of how Bill Sienkiewicz drew it, it's like, it's not, I'm relaxed and leaning back. It's,
You're
and you
definitely
can tell that with
fidgeting.
faces.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's this, the layers of meaning inside that. That's when comics get really interesting, when you have all these layers of meaning that mean different things. When you have somebody who's a bully who's scared, for instance. And the classic way to draw a bully is the whole Bluto Brutus from Popeye thing. You're just a guy who's always snarling and mean and confident. But if you can draw a bully who looks like he's scared and he's doing it because he's scared, then you've actually revealed something real about the world, which is that most bullies are terrified all the time, and that's why they act that way. You know, those type of layers of meaning.
That's one of the things that always struck me about your work, going all the way back to the Cyclops and Jean Grey miniseries that you did, and also with Scott Lobdell, but especially on like your work on Starman with James Robinson, and Top 10 with Alan Moore, is that you have different ways to show faces, different ways to show facial expressions. I wanted to ask you about that because I feel like, without naming any names, a lot of the most successful, financially successful comic book artists of all time have a very limited range of facial expressions. And like, how do you feel about that fact that it seems like that is an art that doesn't, that gets taken for granted sometimes in,
Yeah.
yeah.
Like, I mean, let's take Rob Liefeld, who is a person who a lot of people feel very free online, yeah, to make fun of. But Rob Liefeld, I don't want to draw like Rob Liefeld, but Rob Liefeld is really good at drawing like Rob Liefeld and making it very entertaining. And he's not trying to do what I'm doing. And I am glad he's doing what he's doing the way he's doing it, and entertaining people doing it that way. Now, there's Jim Lee is another good example. He's not as, frankly, as limited as Rob Liefeld, because he keeps on expanding out his the range of what he does artistically. But he's still also not somebody who tries to go for subtle facial expressions. But the way I compare it is, yeah, I mean, the way I compare it is, in a sense, I'm trying to be Lou Reed from the Velvet Underground. Yeah, this kind of weird, discordant emotion band that's trying to go for sounds that no one's made for. While Jim Lee is Queen. I mean, stadium rock, just pulling, you know, going full blast and stuff like that, and singing louder and more powerfully than anyone has, you know, than anyone else in the United States has before. And it's just, that is a great thing. I don't want Jim Lee to start trying to go for the same type of faces and facial expressions that I do. That's not what he's there for. He does, Jim Lee does Jim Lee better than anybody else. And it's a wonderful thing when he does a book.
It's true. Actually, the name I had in mind was Jack Kirby, who was amazing, an amazing artist. But when it comes to his facial expressions, there may be like 5 of them that he used in rotation.
Yeah.
When it comes to storytelling, so for example, um, would you say the top 10 is what put you on the map?
Uh it's it's kind of the funny thing is my career, which it started in 1992,
Mhm.
uh I came to attention faster than I would have expected.
Yeah, you won the Russ
Uh,
Manning Newcomer Award.
right. So I got attention for that. Let me see. I got an X-Men book at a time when without a doubt, the X-Men books were the top of the American comic book industry.
Mhm.
And that got a lot of attention. Yeah, so I mean, and I got awards relatively early on, and so but I think I, the way I'd phrase what top 10 did for me is top 10 made me a 90s artist that people remember today, which
Uh,
does not always happen. It's not what made people notice me then, it's what made people remember me now.
that's that's an interesting way to put it. And I wanted to ask you, that is the first, I think, the first collaboration between you and Zander Cannon. I'm sure a lot of people were expecting me to say you and Alan Moore, but you and Zander Cannon,
Oh,
because
yeah.
with both of them, Alan Moore writes very detailed scripts that is a matter of legend. And some of those scripts have been leaked online, but Zander Cannon was the go-between between you and Alan, right? Like he was the
Oh, yeah.
one handling a lot of the storytelling decisions. What did you learn from that experience, having somebody implement the storytelling for you based on an already very dense script?
Yeah. The thing about Xander is, unlike me, um, he wasn't just an artist. He had been self-publishing his own book, The Replacement God, uh, for many years, lettering it, coloring it, graphic design, drawing it, writing it. So he had gone through every stage and he understood how it all worked together, which is an understanding Alan Moore also has very well. Frankly, beyond just from his writing, but also from badly drawn newspaper style strips like Maxwell the Cat, Magic Cat. Uh,
He'll
so
admit it was badly drawn.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't think he's ever going to brag about the quality of the art on it, but it got the point across of the stories and stuff like that. But yeah, there were things where like Xander was able to explain to me. I came at Alan's script a little bit reverentially because I'd been reading and worshiping his stories as the greatest comics writer in American comics, even though he's British, but the greatest comics writer in American comics since I was a teenager. Um, but Xander was able to take it apart and say, okay, this is what Alan's trying to do in this panel, and he's establishing all the characters. And uh, this next panel, one person is talking, and in the script it says you can see all five people's face, but there's no point in doing that. He's just mentioning where everyone is in relation to each other if you do expand on it. And Alan has said that we can, if we can figure out a better way to tell the story, go ahead and tell the story that way. So I'm going to just focus on that one face so we can see the facial expression. And that's not something I would have done. If the script said panel 5 has 5 heads in it, panel 2 has 5 heads in it, both of them are going to have 5 heads in it. But Xander's like, I'm going to change this to get this point across more strongly, and then we'll return to the 5 heads again in the next panel. And he was able to also explain how this is like things I would never have really understood at all. The way Alan Moore used word balloon placement, and the way he would ask for a change in camera angle where the heads would show up in different order in the page, even though none of them had moved, which means you have to kind of move the camera to get that effect. So that way the dialogue and the word balloons works smoothly. So the person who's talking first shows up in the panel first. And it came a geometry problem that even Xander couldn't solve, but I could, to figure out how to change camera angles and how to arrange everybody so that the first person who talks is always the first person who shows up in the panel, or not always, but usually. But yeah, Xander was able to taught me so much and continues to teach me so much. Also, Xander was, because I've been influenced by Bill Sienkiewicz, who had gone through so many wild, super dense experiments inside of books like Electro Assassin, I wanted to throw as much into a comic book as possible all the time. And Xander's the one who taught me, pull it back a bit, pull it back a bit. If you're going to do
Xander's
a
not
tricky
like
thing,
that. Yeah.
yeah, if you're going to do a tricky thing in one panel, don't do two tricky things, because you're creating two two pitfalls that the reader could fall into, and you're kind of guaranteeing that a lot of readers are going to hit at least one of them and maybe both and not understand the story. And I, like decades later, a few years ago, I said, the important lesson you taught me, Zander, was, only do one tricky thing per panel. He's like, really? That's a rule? Yeah, I guess it is. But I can't remember telling you that. I can't remember ever thinking it. But yeah, that makes sense.
For those in the audience who do not know what Top 10 is, this is a series where in a city called Neapolis, everyone has superpowers, and therefore no one is allowed to use them for vigilante purposes. So it follows the policemen of that particular city. It's very impressive. There's a lot of Easter eggs in it. And Gene, I have a question here from Wincy Ong, because we were talking about how you depict faces. How do you avoid same face syndrome in drawing? In Top 10, the faces on your panels have very different faces. Do you base the likeness on people you know?
Sometimes I did. And that was the time period where I used the most photo reference to get likenesses of people. But even if I didn't, I would tend to pick a face that, like just out of a newspaper or something like that, or a magazine, for each character, to try to make them look different and try to capture how each one had a distinctive face. And I try to avoid making anyone look too super heroic except for a few characters. So Jeff Smacks is very much based on how I draw a Superman head, but with blue-black skin. I'm gonna just have it. That's the blue-black guy is Jeff Smacks. And there's a weird thing I noticed, which is that if you read the America's Best Comics line back then, there was another book called Tom Strong. Yeah. And if you did a photo negative of him and turning kind of peachy, orangey flesh into the photo, the complementary color dark blue, and you take Tom Strong's black hair, complementary color white,
complete with a symbol in the chest.
Yeah, Jeff Smacks is a photo negative of Tom Strong. It was totally subconscious.
You and Chris Sprouse probably weren't talking about that when you were coming up with the characters.
Oh, he came up with the characters first. He was on board America's Best Comics before I was.
Yeah. So
I then saw his stuff and somehow just like slipped it in my head and turned it into Jeff Smacks.
Do you do model sheets?
Not a little. Actually, I have the European Spanish edition of Top 10 here, which includes. I don't do proper like animation model sheets, so you can see some of the doodles I did for some of the characters here.
Yeah. And
some of the weird paths I went on with them. Mm-hmm. Like here's how a character Shock-Headed Peter ended up looking in the book. But my first proposal for him was a chrome skeleton with metal cables running through his body.
That sounds insane, Gene. Like if
I would have
had to draw that every panel.
Oh, there were ones just as hard to do as that, but he had limited emotional range, so I think that's the main reason Alan Moore rejected that first idea for him. There's also a character I gave plaid pants, or paisley pants, King Peacock, which was not in Alan Moore's description, and then I had because of the fussy person I am, I then figured out where every paisley pattern was on those pants and try to make it consistent from panel to panel.
No one would have noticed.
No one would have noticed. But if you go from panel to panel and compare the beginning of the run to the end of the run when he's wearing that outfit, it's always about the same. Like each paisley is there.
That is dedication, and that is something that you are an artist with an amazing attention to detail. And one of the things that I notice when I'm talking to artists is a lot of them say that they hate drawing architecture, but not you.
Oh no, I hate drawing architecture. I just can't. I hate drawing paisley, and I hate drawing architecture. I just can't stand to see it done wrong in one of my drawings.
And your architecture, even though you hate it, is so intricate. There is a 2-page spread of Neapolis that has never been reprinted. That is just so full of lines. And how do you deal with drawing things that you don't actually want to draw, but you have to?
Yeah, it's just okay. So this isn't that panel, but this is a related panel, which is So that's a scene of Neapolis seen from above, where Alan Moore had caught in a cold or a flu and needed to slow me down. So he drew 2 pages of script, and the second page of the script was something he knew that would take me several days to draw, so he could recover from his flu and get on to the rest of the story. Yeah, I think I take a good background as part, a good setting and a good background as part of the story, almost like a character. And I like to make a world where you can imagine walking through it and seeing how people live in it and where they do it. I don't like the idea of a setting where you can't imagine, like where people will stop and take a break and smoke a cigarette or eat lunch or things like that, or some hint of a restroom or something like that. I want the city to feel lived in, and not just like this abstract repeated grid of little squares that are supposed to represent windows and stuff like that.
Yeah. When Top 10 ended, you and Zander went off to do a couple of different spin-offs. You did Top 10 The 49ers, which is set in 1949. It is a prequel. And that is when you first started using your is that when you first started using the Copics?
No, actually I used Inkwash at that point.
Inkwash.
I hadn't discovered Copics yet. It was a few years later that I saw another artist, Adam Hughes, using those. And I did have Prismacolor markers. But the thing I like about, well, okay, I'm just jumping subject to Copics really quick. The thing I loved about Copics, past tense, was they used to have a line of wide markers, which suddenly allowed me to cover large areas. And then they discontinued them because they're monsters, which is why I no longer recommend. I never say, that's why I said at the beginning of this talk, I don't recommend Copics as a specific brand to anybody, because they stabbed us all in the back and got rid of those. But no, in the 49ers, I used ink washes, and I had somebody else, a professional painter, do some of the ink washes in it for me. Oh, it's not in this volume, it's a different volume. Okay, different collected version. But it was so labor intensive, I decided I could never really do that again in a long story.
But is that when you, because at this point in time, that's kind of what I think of as the Gene Ha distinctive look. Is that,
yeah,
yeah,
the thing is, there's always been a kind of a vision in my head of what I want to get across on the page, which you have to then kind of compare to what the technology allowed me to do early on. And I've just been kind of waiting for technology to catch up. So early on, like before then, the first time I did markers, it was incomplete color guides for Starman and Shade. And I sent those into DC, and they said, editor Archie Goodwin said, these are beautiful. Why don't we just, I meant them as shading guides, because I didn't think that people would want a non-color comic book in the United States. And Archie Goodwin, my editor, said, these are beautiful. They're done with warm grays and cool grays. They give them kind of an old-fashioned feel. Why don't we just use these as the color guides, as the actual colors we print? And they did, and that worked. But it was super labor intensive, so I was trying to figure out a way to have more control. Inkwash seemed like the solution to that next. So when I had the chance to do that on the 49ers, I tried that, but it was way too labor intensive. There was just no way I could keep on doing that again and still have a roof over my head. Mm-hmm. I did it again with markers finally. And after I got Copics on Justice League of America with Brad Meltzer, and it was the issue where I wanted my fourth Eisner on that one. But it was a it was one issue. I couldn't keep that up forever. And then the nice thing that's happened now is that because I finally found a drawing tool I like that allows me to do values relatively quickly. So I'm using an iPad Pro. Oh, and the screensaver is an illustration I did in there. But that was done inside of a monochrome, just kind of black, white, and purple.
Mm-hmm. Wonder Woman Historia. That's Wonder Woman Historia, which we'll talk about next.
Oh yeah. And that allowed me to finally get across the images I had in my head the way I wanted to get across.
Yeah,
which is very shaded, very black and white photography, but with a little bit of color, or sometimes vivid color. But I can't do vivid color quickly.
My last question about Top 10 is Zander Cannon is on record as saying that as great as Alan Moore is, and as you have mentioned, he may well be the greatest comics writer of all time, or American comics writer of all time. As great as Alan Moore is, the density of his scripts uh, means that if you follow it to the letter, you'll get a great product. But it may not be the most emotionally satisfying thing to do as a creative. How do you feel about that? Do you feel the same way, or not at all?
Oh, yeah, there's actually a kind of a coldness to a lot of Alan Moore stories. It and also a little these are I'm going to be repeating things Xander's pointed out to me, and it's like, oh, you're right, Zander. But Zander, Alan Moore did some storytelling that would, I'm sure, when because they were alive at the same time, probably drove Will Eisner a little bit crazy, because he is definitely a guy who will say, quote in the script, there's a giant floating city in the sky and the two people are pointing at it, and then he'll have somebody in the foreground saying, look up there in the sky, it's a giant floating city. Because Alan Moore over the years, because of the various artists he's worked with, has learned not to always trust his artists, so he'll do the belt and suspenders and put in the dialogue what's happening in the scene. Yeah. So yeah, and then he's had so many mediocre artists over the years, and some of the best of all time working in American comics, but also some mediocre ones. Yeah, he's going to make sure the story reads well, even if the artist is incompetent.
Yeah, if the artist is having a bad day.
Yeah, or a bad career. So yes.
Would you say that you find more, like, jumping ahead a little bit, would you find more emotional satisfaction in something like May, or in if you were working with a writer who wasn't so specific?
It's I mean, the thing is, Alan Moore is so good at what he does. This is a phrase I guess I use a lot. Alan Moore is, but I mean, these are geniuses. Alan Moore is so good at writing Alan Moore scripts, even if he doesn't have, if he can sometimes be a little bit cold and clinical in some ways with his stories. They're so powerful and so thoughtful, and they make you think so hard and feel things that no one else can feel. I love doing them, and then working on them and seeing them in print makes me so happy and proud in a way that no other writer can, including myself. And then if I look at James Robinson, who I did the work with on The Shade and Starman, and his scripts are very stripped down. And he does something which is the rule of thumb I would give to everyone instead of what Alan Moore does, which is, if you're a writer and you know your artist, only give them the information that they need. Don't give them the information they don't need. So if they're an experienced artist, you don't have to explain to them how to do this and that type of storytelling. Or the example I always like to give is, if you're writing a scene of a haunted house and you want it to be scary, don't describe everything inside the haunted house and everything that happens in every panel. If it's a good artist, just tell them, make the scene as spooky and scary as you want. Tell them the effect you want instead of describing what's in the scene. And this is the opposite of the normal writing advice you get if you're writing directly to the reader, where, show, don't tell.
Yes.
But in the case of the script, you don't write a novel that says, you should be scared now. Are you scared? I hope you're scared. But that's exactly what you should do a comic script, where you tell the artist, scare the reader, make it spooky, make it fearful, make it unclear what's in the distance there, or make it very clear, but show the magic trick to the artist and say, you figure out how to make the magic trick work. And this is something, when we get to Historia, I can kind of give you a few examples of Kelly Sue DeConnick doing this with me, where she described the effect we needed, but she did not describe how I was supposed to do it.
Amazing. Yeah. I would like to get to that in a bit, but I would like to get to the fan questions first.
Oh,
a little break. So we, again, from Win Seong, he's asking, great insight, Gene, that making comics gives you the opportunity to create big stories on your own as opposed to filmmaking or animation. But doing art on your own can get you lonely. How do you manage loneliness while dedicating hours in making comics? Aside from joining Zoom calls like this.
Oh, man. Things like audiobooks, podcasts. For me, the visual part of my brain is entertained while I'm drawing, but the verbal and social part of my brain is starved for interaction. So I do my best of just like I listen to human voices instead of music usually. And that just kind of like the best thing is that when I have friends who do podcasts, who I've I'm very close to, like people I grew up with or people I've known for years and hung out with. And then listening to their podcast is the very best thing, because it's like, oh, it's almost like really hanging out with this person I like actually really hanging out with.
We have another question from this is a cartoonist from the Philippines named Carlo Jose San Juan. Watching Gene work with Copics inspired my own work with markers. Sorry,
Oh, wow.
that wasn't the question. Okay, we'll move on to the next question. Mel Casipit, who is another cartoonist from the Philippines, is asking, what is your drawing schedule? Do you have a specific time when you draw?
Oh, it's whenever I get all my chores and errands running around town done in the day, which sometimes will be like, or whatever, I try to work out a little bit so I don't die early. That is literally the main reason I work out. It's not like to look good, it's so I don't die young. Also how I figure out what I eat. But then after that, after I get done with all those early morning chores, I start working, and then I usually just stop at 10 p.m. at night. So
Is that a hard
2200
stop?
hours. Yeah, after that point, I found that the quality of my drawing goes downhill so fast. There's not much point in trying to push my schedule beyond that.
Oh, okay.
If on a hard deadline, I will do it. If I in the case where I'm thinking it's worth it to put out a drawing I'm not 100% happy with, just to meet the deadline because they need it done. But if I have the choice, I will stop at 10 o'clock because everything is crap after that, or crappier.
I'm going to use this next question from a local comics writer named Bambi Amago to segue into talking about Historia. Do you prefer working with writers like Alan Moore, clinical and precise, and gives lots and lots of directions to the artist, or someone who gives more freedom and little direction to the artist?
I like well, actually, I mean, what I enjoy the most, as far if I with the same level of talented writer, is a writer who gives me more space, but tells me what they want to accomplish on the page. And one thing I really love, or I get annoyed if I don't get, is I like to have the dialogue, because I like to have the beats of the social interaction, which you usually get from the dialogue. And if you don't, then it's a little bit hard to figure out how you structure panels, who's feeling what emotion at what time. There's a saying inside of acting that real acting is reacting. So it's not just you drawing the person talking and being angry and shouting. It's how does the other person react to that person shouting? Like if they're terrified, or if they're angry back, or if they're unimpressed. And you can't really figure out these beats, or at least I can't, unless I have the dialogue.
Okay, and I think we can move on to Historia from there. So, what is it like working with Kelly Sue? And can you give us some of those examples that you were telling us earlier about how she told you the magic trick, and it was up to you to figure it out? Artists
Okay.
are the directors of the story, people.
Yeah. There's a. Okay, so I'm gonna. I think we have a good example in here. Okay, so this is kind of an extreme example here, but I have a slideshow I gave recently at a comic shop. So anyway, I'm going to show you something from the first volume of Historia. I did the second volume, or the second chapter. And in the first chapter, they were trying to show Kelly Sue and the first artist, Phil Jimenez, were trying to show the history of injustice against women. And they did this with a series of Vase paintings, Greek vase paintings. But the women in each scene, partially just so they didn't have the kind of porn violence, or violence porn, or abuse porn, they did the women as flat red figures. And then to represent how immense the history and the future of injustice against women is, they had this giant scene of all these vase paintings going on forever to show just the injustices going on forever in the past and forever into the future that they could see. But then in volume 2, we wanted to repeat, Kelly Sue wanted to repeat this idea of showing that the immensity of the injustice, but we needed to find a new way to do it. And so she had a scene where it's Hera lamenting the how huge this injustice is and how it keeps on going on to the past. And even if she looks into the future and she's Hera, she can see many things no other god can see. 2,000, 3,000 years in the future, she can still see the injustice continuing. And she has birds in the scene and feathers, a feather fan.
It
And the next
almost
page of
looks like
script,
just one bird moving from panel to panel too. But
in the end,
almost
there are three
you see
birds.
there are three,
Yeah. It starts off with one bird and then becomes three.
Mhm.
And then Kelly Sue said in the script, she wanted me to convey the immensity of this injustice using birds and feathers and Hera. And she didn't know how I was going to do it, but that was the job she gave me. And it had to be emotionally impactful and also show this is a big problem that goes up to, at least to the present day and beyond, probably. Which, not an easy thing to try to figure out.
That's very metaphorical, Gene. I don't.
Yeah. Well, I can show you what I did.
There we go.
Which is, there's the rough. And I'd used, I got the script in batches. So I'd already established that Hera, for my volume, Hera's symbol is the golden spiral, which is like a seashell spiral.
Yeah.
And it shows her plans spinning off into infinity. And I was like, oh, well, that'll be the perfect way to represent injustice spinning off into infinity, into the future. And then I created a pattern of the feathers flying off. And in your head, you can kind of imagine them getting bigger and bigger and continuing to spiral forever to give that sense of motion with the birds. And I decided in the spaces in between, I hadn't figured out what yet.
Oops.
Yeah, I was going to create scenes of injustice.
And then
there's the pencil stage, which I did on the iPad Pro. Yeah.
Do you not work traditionally anymore?
Sometimes. Actually, I did a story for Alex Ross's anthology for Marvel.
Yeah.
And he asked me to do that. This isn't a page run, but he asked me to do it in my marker style.
Okay. Which
was a pain in the ass, but it worked really well. But I don't want to keep on doing it that way because it takes forever. But yeah, and then that's a stage before when I handed it off to the colorist. Oh, and I'm going to say my way.
Face.
Yeah, and I'm going to say what a crucial part of the scene is that I wanted to give a little feeling of hope in the end. So the last feather and the last part of the spiral is Mary Wollstonecraft, the mother of Mary Shelley, who created Frankenstein, writing the first English language defense of the rights of women, which was a very important event inside of feminism. But yeah, and the bird is dropping off a feather for her from Hera, from the past, to help inspire her to write the rest of the volume or the rest of the treatise.
That's amazing. And I would like people in the chat to let me know what you think of that particular step-by-step process that Gene just showed us. Gene, I want to ask you about, because we're talking about storytelling with collaborators, and so far we've been talking about storytelling with collaborating with writers, but you did mention the first Historia book was drawn by Phil Jimenez. The third one was drawn by Nicholas Scott. Both of these, so this is Wonder Woman Historia retelling the origin of the Amazons. Both of these artists are long established as Wonder Woman artists, but this was your first Wonder Woman work. Am I right?
My first. It's a weird one. Yeah, it's I didn't actually draw Wonder Woman inside my book.
Yeah, but franchise-wise.
Oh yeah, franchise-wise. It's the first time I've done kind of a solo Wonder Woman book, even though I didn't get to draw her in it. But I have drawn her in Justice League books.
Yes. So, and then when you got the project, knowing that you would be bookended by these two established artists on this particular franchise / character, did you feel any pressure to try to live up to that particular standard that you knew that they were getting? And then the second part of my question is, when you saw Phil Jimenez and how much he elevated his game in the first one, like, did that change whatever pressure you felt going in?
Yeah. Phil Jimenez started in comics just a few years before I did, and we came up pretty much together. I love his work, and I'm impressed by it. But I will not. I'm not intimidated. I was not intimidated by Phil's work. I felt we're kind of neck and neck. And then I saw what he did on Historia, and it's kind of like, okay, now I'm intimidated. It is he. It. I can't think of anyone else. It's hard to think of anyone else in American comics who's done anything that compares to his Volume 1. It's stunning work, and I knew I wouldn't be able to match him at his game, much less beat him at his own game. So I had to come up with different things I was going to accomplish in my volume based on the story.
You had to be Gene Ha.
Yeah. I will say also there's a thing where a lot of the costumes in Historia were insanely detailed and intricate in a way that all my previous most intricate costumes never were. But there's also a trick where the Gene Ha style of storytelling is people. I very rarely have people striking iconic poses, like, just whatever. I try to make them natural. I try to draw them from random angles and with their head. Like, I love doing 3/4 from behind angles, which doesn't actually get used in comics a lot because it's hard to draw, and it's hard to get the facial expression across. But you've seen my inspiration. Bill Sienkiewicz can do fully emotional figures from behind, and you get like more density of emotion than anybody else does. So anyway, but Phil only had to draw some of these Amazon designs of his once, because he just introduced them and then he moved on.
Yeah.
And they were incredibly intricate. So I had to figure out what they looked like when they're talking to other people from different angles. And there was very little to go on from this front view because they were so intricate. It's kind of like, it's like looking at a custom chandelier made by Dolly, and then it's like a drawing of a painting of a chandelier by Dolly, which is surreal, and then having to construct it in real life. And I don't think I always succeeded. It was hard, and a few times I made some mistakes.
Well, I'm not sure the average person reading your comic would notice those mistakes.
I'll just give you one example, which is definitely a mistake. So Phil was working on his book up until like a few months until he was before my book came out. So his book came out and my book came, or until before I finished. It was insane how he kept on making each scene more complex, and sometimes it'd be a little bit sketchy when it started off. So there's one character who has a whip, but he'd drawn it in very sketchily. So I thought it was a curved sword. So there's a character you'll see in the first time the Amazon show up in my volume of a character who in Phil's volume has a whip, and in my volume has a curved sword. And it's because I didn't understand his first work. And then later on, he made it more intricate. But by then, I'd moved on like 20, 30 pages. And it's kind of like, should I redraw that? No, nope. She also owns a curved sword and she owns a whip.
It's easy enough. It's easy enough to know prize, Gene.
Yeah.
Easy enough to know prize. I was gonna say that double page spread of Hera, and all of the birds and the Injustice Against Women spread, is a very rare Gene Ha money shot. It does seem to be the quote unquote money shot seems to be a thing that you use very sparingly, especially for a 90s artist, because I feel like 90s artists really love 90s artists love our money shots, our double page spreads every couple of pages.
We want it to look like like when I say that, like, Jim Lee doesn't do subtle very much. I mean, in a classic Jim Lee comic from the 90s, every panel looks like it was designed to be a poster.
Yes. And
everyone's doing the cool poses.
Exactly. Is that something that you very consciously do? Like, you just to maximize impact?
I like to do layers of meaning. And so someone like the typical thing in comics, and again, one person who does this fantastically is Jim Lee, is to make it like a Queen concert, just that one emotion said so operatically, powerfully, and beautifully. It's just hard to turn your eyes away. when you read a comic drawn by me, I want you to be able to have the initial, well, this is actually kind of a weird, subtle kind of point of view thing. It's not just like me. I was partially inspired by Bill Sienkiewicz, but also it's also a point of view that a typical American comic can be read in about 15 minutes.
Yes.
And if any of you out there buy the original floppies, you know they're really expensive in the United States for 15 minutes of entertainment. But if you're going to buy it in a foreign country, the original floppies, it's outrageous. In Europe or the Philippines, you're going to be paying like twice as much for that floppy.
Yeah.
And for 15 minutes of entertainment. So I want my comics to be entertaining when you read it your second time or your third time, and you're going to see things you didn't see the first time. And some of that is drawing detailed backgrounds in a city you can imagine walking through, or background characters who look like they have lives of their own. But it's also, when you look at the facial expressions of the characters, if you really study them, oftentimes you'll see them like people aren't looking at the person they're talking to, or something like that. Their eyes are averted, or someone who's supposed to be like if you look at somebody, it's flirting. Like flirting is all about the subtlety of meaning, of not meaning what you're saying.
Yes.
Like if you say a girl has a beautiful dress on today, that's not really what you're saying if you're flirting with her. And if she laughs at your bad joke, she's not actually saying your joke is funny. You know, I want to have that kind of layers of meaning inside of my stories too.
So it basically something that lends itself to a repeated reading.
Yeah, and the meaning will change a little bit when you read it again. Yeah.
That way you get your money's worth too.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is a very Will Eisner way of looking at it, because Will Eisner's spirit stories are 8 pages long, but you can read them over and over and over again. I think that's very interesting. We've been talking about 2 of your writer collaborators, Alan Moore and Kelly Sue DeConnick. And this next question from Sarah Albano, you can use examples from either of those, or one that we haven't talked about, which is, what kind of disagreements do you encounter with your writers, and how do you solve said disagreement together? Has it ever escalated so badly that the process was holding you guys back?
Let me see. The thing, I'd like to work with writers where I respect their work and I trust them. And if they're telling me to do something that goes against how I think it should work, if I trust them, I'll do what they're asking, if they say that I'm not doing it the right way. So like a really good example of that is the Justice League of America story I did with
Meltzer.
Is right, dropping. Yeah.
Brad Meltzer.
Yeah, Brad Meltzer. Where he wanted to show 2 superheroes trapped inside of a collapsed building, and to indicate that the building was crushing them and getting more compact as it settled. He wanted the panels to get thinner vertically, and the gutters between the panels to get larger. And I said, well, that seems a little strange, because, well, it feels like cheating to me. Because like
a waste of space.
Waste of space, but also I'm going to be drawing less every page until they escape. And I said, I could just draw closer and closer close-ups to indicate that it's getting tighter and tighter, and I could draw the same amount of image. And he was like, trust me, this is going to work. And I did trust him, and he was right. It worked in a way that me just doing tighter close-ups would not have gotten the effect across.
That issue with Red Arrow and Vixen is one hell of an issue. I will point out, Gene, that you mentioned that you hate drawing architecture, but you can't stand it when architecture is badly drawn, so you put in a lot of effort into it. But here's an example where he's giving you less work to do, and you push back against it. It feels like there's something here about feeling like you have to be putting in as much effort as you possibly can.
Yeah, I was afraid it would just feel like the reader would just feel like they're getting cheated, but the claustrophobic effect he was talking about really worked. So it was also kind of a subtle thing where like there's also another thing where it's a collapsed building, so it's very dark inside each panel, and it's getting blacker and blacker. But also we couldn't get across the effect of claustrophobia if the space between the panels was white, because then every page would get brighter and brighter. So you had to have a dark panel with a dark gutter.
Mm-hmm.
And then also to get it across, I did jagged photo negative. We had a photo negative, jagged panel borders. And if I just tried to do that in white paint, it wouldn't have been pure white or crisp and clean. So yeah, it was a lot of production work for everybody at the time.
Yeah. And talking about magic tricks, that particular issue does feel like a magic trick. So I'm not going to spoil it for anyone. There is a literal twist in the middle of the book, and I think it's well worth hunting down.
Yeah. I'm also going to say, Brad Meltzer does great comics. If you read his novels, it's funny because some of them actually read more like really good episodic comics than his comic scripts do. The novels are great.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, they're really good. They're really fast paced.
That's one hell of a plug. Um, yeah. So that's another question from LJ Almonte, which is, have you ever had creative differences with your collaborators, and how did you resolve it? I feel like that's the same question, unless you have something else to add.
No, I'm just gonna. I mean, I have drawn stories where I haven't. I didn't like the story as much. I'm not going to name names on that. But what I will say is that I feel like if the script I feel like isn't getting the point across, it's my job to figure out what the point is, and then have the art as much as possible solve those problems. Like if the dialogue is goofy, I need to make somehow the acting sell that line, despite the fact that it's bad dialogue.
Obviously, good art will make a good story great.
Yeah.
But do you think good art can make a bad story good?
It can't fit like a badly structured story. There's no way the art can fix the structure. Like, and you can't. There's a limit to how much you can fix the dialogue with good acting. This is both in both movies and television and in comics. Mm-hmm. It kind of depends. Like it depends on what you want to solve. But comics is a really weird form where you can have a level of absurdity of and mishmash of just mixing together things that shouldn't work together. That's hard to make work in any other medium.
What do you think that
so you
is?
can have things. It feels, because comics feels casual. It feels personal. When a good comic often feels like the artist wrote a note to, like, drew it just for you, and just like a note you pass in class while the teacher's not watching. It's just a personal note just for you. And if the class artist hands you a drawing of the teacher and making fun of the teacher, you don't expect that to be perfect. You expect it to be personal and witty. And there's a sense that like comics can often get away with doing that, of just this little personal note that's a little irreverent, a little personal, and doesn't have to be perfect.
And isn't it weird that it feels that way regardless of the country that the comic is coming from? Like, I feel like manga feels like that. I feel like European comics feel like that. Filipino comics definitely feel like that. It just seems inherent in the comics medium that it feels that way.
Yeah, and it's just because some comics do try to feel like live action movies, or try to feel like 3D video games, and they lose a little bit of that. But a good comic, even if it's very rendered and very painted, it feels like something personal to you. It's like part of the reason why Studio Ghibli in Japan is so amazing is because I can't remember the name of the guy who's behind the lead guy there, but Miyazaki. Yeah, it's pretty much the only animation studio where they can make something that big and still make it feel like something personal from one person. And this is something that's easy to do in comics.
Yeah.
Just that personal note that's just meant for you.
How do you handle creative blocks or moments of artistic doubts? That is a question from Mel Kasipit again.
I mean, well, you do have to sometimes take a break. Like, literally, as an artist, the parts of your brain that imagine the images, if you keep working and working and working, without taking a break and refreshing, they get exhausted. Like literally the neurotransmitters in your brain run out, and you can't make it work until you let that recharge. And literally the chemicals to get to reset inside your brain. Getting a good night's sleep once in a while is very helpful and stuff like that. One of the things is that if you don't mind doing a comic book that's really delirious, you can keep on pushing until it doesn't look like your original goal at all. It doesn't look that polished, perfect vision that was in your head. It's something different that's kind of a delirious thing. And I'm going to say, frankly, a lot of what's great about, say, Jack Kirby's work is he would keep pushing himself and getting crazier and crazier with it. And it stopped looking like, if you look at his early comics from the 40s and 50s, he was trying to make it look like reality.
Yeah.
And then later in the 50s and in the 60s, and especially in the 70s, he realized, oh, if I keep pushing myself harder and harder, it may not look like the reality I had in my head anymore, but it's starting to look really interesting now that I haven't had any. I've drawn a 20-page comic in 3 days.
Yeah.
It looks amazing. It did. The older I get, the more I love the weirder Jack Kirby art. So you can keep on doing that, but that's not how I work.
There's a character in Jack Kirby's New Gods named Brola who literally has bricks for hands. And like, this is amazing. We have another question. We have a question from Jan Kayla Claudette V. Almazan, who is an architecture student who also draws. You have mentioned that you don't recommend Copics anymore because of that discontinued line. Do you have any other recommendations for markers? And what is your opinion of using brush tips for coloring, if ever?
I do not like chisel tips on markers. I've never been able to be expressive with them. So yeah, I love brush tips. Yeah, all my markers are either the wide tips or the brush tips. But the strongest advice I would have is learn watercolor.
Really?
Yeah. Marker's not bad, but you can get all those subtleties from watercolor and those techniques, those materials if you like. And I'll give a little confession here. There are no brands of commercial commercial art markers I know of that are truly archival. So you have to really protect these from ultraviolet light because they will fade.
Oh, all right. So that is another tip for you guys.
Yeah.
We have a question from an anonymous attendee who is asking, and I feel like this is a great segue to talking about May, your creator-owned May. If you are doing writing and drawing by yourself, how do you keep the ball rolling?
Oh, I guess the thing is, I mean, like, I know where I want the story to go and stuff like that. And even if I don't know how I'm going to get there, if I'm creative and I try to think of it from the character's point of view, I'm going to be able to write it. I'm going to be able to figure out a solution, and it may not necessarily be one I thought I was going to go for originally. The American television show Breaking Bad, that's how the writing room worked, where they would, in one episode, set up a problem for the characters. Like, if I let this person live, he's going to narc on me, and therefore, just all these incredibly complex problems and stuff like that. But it's, if I allow this child to live, I will go to jail. But I don't want to kill the child, so how am I going to deal with this problem? And then they wouldn't figure out the solution when they finished that episode. And then the next episode, they knew their character was supposed to be smart, so they just thrash it out. How does this character solve this problem? And that's kind of how I work. I'll also say, if the character's not like you, the other thing with May is that the main characters are mostly women. I'm not a woman, and I don't look at the world necessarily as a woman, but I have friends who are women. And that's why I wrote the book, is because...
Nor are you that age.
No. Yes. So I talked to people that age, and I talked to friends who are women, and kind of ran things about them and asked them about their experiences. If you're going to write about somebody who's different from you, ideally find someone who's like that and learn about their experience so you can make it as authentic as possible. And in fact, there's one episode where I found out that there's a character in the book, Dahlia, who I based on my friend Molly Jane, visually, and then it turned out they really did both go to the same college, the same university. And then the experiences that I want the fictional character Dahlia to go through turned out to be things that Molly Jane had experienced in real life at that university. So Dahlia is a university student at the start of the story, and she's dealing with problems at the university, and it's like Molly Jane had done it. And as I kept on questioning Molly Jane about her experiences, I realized she was pretty much writing the issue. So that was her first writing credit, because I was like, okay, write the script, and I will translate it into a comic script, and then I will draw it as a comic book. And that's how we wrote that issue.
That is pretty incredible. For those people who have not read May, how would you describe the book?
Oh, it is a modern fantasy story. And it's about two sisters, one of whom, the older sister, finds a doorway to another world at the age of 13. And after a while, without telling anyone in her family, she loves it there so much, she just stops coming back. The younger sister, the nerdier sister, stays, takes care of the family business and her aging dad, finishes school, and doesn't find out what happened until a few months after she gets out of high school. Her sister comes back and brings her problems from the other world with her. And they have a very different way of looking at the world. And one is an action hero, and the other is a smart nerd girl. And I have a lot of friends who are smart nerd geek girls, and I want to do a story about a character like that. And the way smart nerds deal with problems would be especially smart nerds who can't beat up other people easily, is different than how the solutions that come when you can walk into a room and think, there's no one in this room who can beat me up. There's never anyone in any room who can beat me up. Most of us are not Bruce Lee or something like that. Mm-hmm. So May has to figure out the smart solution to things. And because she thinks things through, she realizes problems to the way her action hero's older sister deals with the world that never occurred to the action hero.
It should be noted that her action hero older sister's name is Annie. So they are Annie.
Oh, and May.
And May. Annie.
Yeah. Which is not Annie's birth name. She was originally Abby, but she wanted to be someone different in the other world.
What is your favorite aspect of writing May? Is it the world building, the dialogue, the plotting, the character building?
Oh, it's just kind of everything. Of just like, it's amazing. I mean, I love work. I've worked with so many great writers throughout my career, but I start off with when I'm writing my own stories, I start off with visual storytelling with a little bit of dialogue doodle in the sides, and being able to go from those doodles to a finished story is just incredibly satisfying. And I'm able to make my storytelling as Eisner style efficient and comics cinematic as I want, as pleases me. And I just really love just being able to do that, and just dropping small clues here and there. There's I know what I'm building to, and just being able to set up these stories for the reader is just an immense joy for me. I'm going to say that part of what I really enjoy about writing is it's a mind game. It's a game you're playing against the reader, in a sense, where the reader has expectations of where the story is going to go and what they want from it. And you want to tell a good story that entertains the reader. But me as a writer, I don't want to tell it in the way that the reader expects necessarily. I'm going to do some type of twist and try to tell a slightly different story than the one you thought I was going to tell at the start. And the joy I get from telling a story that way is really immense. Last year, I got to talk with a young, successful fantasy artist who just come out with like 3 novels at a convention. And I began asking her about like this whole thing of, do you ever find it like it's a game where you're always trying to tell a different story than the reader expecting? You're trying to break the genre, or not just, go follow all the genre conventions and do exactly what the reader expects. And she's like, no, I'm always following the genre conventions. I'm always doing what the reader expects. I'm just doing it in a really entertaining way. And it's like, oh, I hadn't realized that was the thing people do, or try to do. I thought everyone was trying to surprise and twist and delight the reader with like some clever twists and stuff like that. But no, that's definitely how I do it.
I feel like that's a lot because of your Bill Sienkiewicz influence. Actually, I remember telling Bill when we did that whole tribute thing about George Perez last year, and I remember telling him that I felt that Bill is the out of the box artist, but George is the box. And like the best possible box, and
Yeah.
then Bill is everything outside that box. I feel like that's those are two possible options that you can do. You can stay in the box and do it as well as possible, or you can break the box.
Yeah.
I feel like this is a great way to get to Chester Quizon's question, and I feel like we could use an example from May for this, which is, what is your favorite show and tell kind of scenario in comics writing?
Oh,
Show not tell, sorry.
I I wanted May and Abby to invade a ball held by mad scientist nobles on another world. And I just kind of had fun with what was kind of a jokey concept, which was um the dehydrated Martians from the Warner Brothers cartoons. And I put that in as kind of a, yeah, here we
I
go.
know
The
exactly what
dehydrated
those
Martians.
are too.
Yeah. So I threw them in here. And I didn't know how, in a room full of mad scientists with mad scientist weaponry, the two sisters were going to escape at first. But once I had that in, I kind of figured out, oh, I can use that as a solution for the problem. And what she does is Abby, once she sees that her action hero sister hasn't figured out a way to defeat a room full of scientists with advanced mad science weaponry, uh, tosses all of them into a large fountain. And suddenly the room is full of re-expanding, they're not actually Martians, they're kind of a form of zombie, but just the room's overwhelmed with them, and they're naked and confused.
Of course they are.
Yeah,
It
and
may,
just while everyone's
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, just while everyone's confused, that's how they make their escape.
May is such a great series, Gene, and I need to ask you when the next book is, if you're working on the next book, and when that would be coming out. I
Not at
know
the moment.
Historia took up a lot of your time.
Yeah, I have the next volume plotted out, but I have not done the layouts for it yet, and I haven't started drawing it yet. But I know the plot in pretty good detail.
End to end, what is your process for creating May? Because now we're talking about you doing everything. You're doing the story, you're doing the plot. Do you still write a full script for yourself the same way you would
Oh no.
get it? Okay. Like
Okay.
what do you do?
What I do is I create note cards where I figure out the major points where I need to get to in the story to get to where I want to in the very end of the whole story arc. And then based on that, and then I'll rearrange the postcards once I get better ideas. And here's the important thing in how I work is that you're only going to be so creative in every day. And if you limit yourself to all the ideas that you have in one day, if you plan everything ahead, you're not going to use all the creativity that you have access to, because tomorrow you'll have more good ideas. And this is something I learned from Alan Moore when he's talking about how he doesn't plot tightly unless he has to, like in a time travel story. He always leaves room for himself to be creative later. And then I go on to the tiny little thumbnails, which are literally drawings about this big with little notes on dialogue and action. But even in that tiny little thumbnail drawing, there has to be, the storytelling has to be clear. It has to work that tiny. And then I blow that up, do a pencil, then I do the inks, and then I do the color on top of that, larger and larger. But at any point along the way, if I come up with a better idea, I use the better idea.
Okay.
Yeah, it's oftentimes like, or if someone points out that an idea is bad, I will change the idea.
How do you, where does the lettering and the dialogue come in?
There's a rough stage though. I start the thumbnail, then I go to, there's actually, okay, a rough stage where I do, includes grayscale. I don't have the full color yet, but I include the grayscale, and here's actually a scene of that from the back of May showing the making of. And then I put in the full dialogue at that stage. This is after the thumbnail stage. And then after that, that's when I go to pencils and inks. So you can see like inks, flat colors, final colors, and stuff like that, which is pretty much how everyone else works. But that's how I work it. And because, like I said, when I work in some other people's scripts, I need all the dialogue to make the emotional beats work between the characters and to figure out how, and then I can't really figure out what the characters are doing unless I have the dialogue. Yeah. I do need final dialogue at that point, but I don't type it into a script so much as I write it into the rough, and then I type a script from that for the letterer afterwards.
In the letter in this case is Zander Cannon.
Yes. And yeah, I like the fact that Zander Cannon is a very imprecise, loose letterer. Because some people have looked at my work and said it looks like it's generated by a computer. So I think if I have very tight, precise, frankly, computer-generated lettering, even if it was originally hand-drawn, it's going to look a little bit dead. So I want to have a little bit looser lettering just to make it get that personal message or personal note from the artist feel for the reader.
What about the business aspect of something like May, where you have to pitch it to Oni Press? Where does how does that work? Did you create the comic first and then pitch it, or did you have a plot line and then you pitched it? How does that work?
I had the first volume. Well, it was a very different era in comics. So when I was about 2015, and I decided I was going to do a Kickstarter to get it funded, and then Dark Horse at the time, the original publisher, found out about it and liked what they saw the first issue, and said they'd like to print it. So, but nowadays, I mean, it's very different. The American comic books market, print comic books market, is very screwed up. They're driving the comics retailers crazy. Print comics Image is not doing well now, for instance, and stuff like that. They're doing okay, but they're not doing nearly as well as they used to be doing. The American market has shifted mostly to the successful part of the American market is actually not comic shops now. It's selling to bookstores, libraries, and schools and stuff like that. For the typically about a 13-year-old reader. So like Raina Telgemeier books and stuff like that. So yeah, it's also webcomics are doing pretty well and stuff like that, like Line Webtoon. And also the big multimedia companies and even medium-sized ones like Line Webtoon are asking for more ownership of the projects. And they're less eager to give you a share.
That sucks.
Yeah. So so as much as you can, if it's a project you love, make sure that you have as much ownership as you need for it so you can keep on telling the story. Because the history of American comics is full of titles where the company got got ownership of the story, the artist and the writer lost control, and the project just died. There's no way to tell the story anymore, or if it was not this. They couldn't tell the story they wanted to anymore. If maybe it went out with somebody else, or just it's not there anymore. There's all these stories by from comic book companies like Komiket, which I was a huge fan of. Matt Wagner's Mage and the Elementals from Bill Willingham. They lost control of their stories. They couldn't tell them anymore. There's a American company called Tokyo Pop, which all these now famous American comic book creators did their first work there with their dream projects. And then the company said, "We own it. You don't have any ownership at all anymore." But Tokyo Pop hasn't done anything with any of those stories. They don't know what to do with them without the original creators, but also the original creators can't get their stories back.
That's terrible.
And yeah, you don't want that to happen to you. If you can figure out a way around that and do crowdfunding or webcomic or any other way where you own it, get as much ownership as you can.
We are we're gonna wrap up. We got a few questions. We know that you gotta go soon, Gene. But you mentioned earlier, so this question is from Cam. You mentioned earlier how you show your collaborator the magic trick. How do you fight off the urge not to spoil the story?
Oh, I mean, not spoiling the story is easy. I mean, not wanting to spoil the story is easy. It's a matter of making sure that you don't give away too much. You have to give them enough so they can tell what's going on, but you don't want to give how the whole situation. You want to. I guess a good way to put this. I haven't really explained this a lot before, so the things I talk about a lot is very easy for me to just glibly explain it all. But yeah, you want to throw the characters into a situation where there's no obvious solution. And in fact, it may be so hard to figure out the solution, you don't know the solution when you throw them into it, which is what they did in the Breaking Bad TV show.
It's also the example that you showed just now from May.
Yeah, and typically in most issues of May, I don't know what the solution is and how they get out of it when I start thinking it up. By the time I finish up my thumbnails, I figured it out. That's the real plotting writing stage. But it's fun going through that and figuring out from their viewpoint how they're going to deal with the situation, how they're going to panic, who's going to get angry, who I didn't expect to get angry, or who's going to be, all these different emotions they go through, and then the solutions they hopefully will come up with, because I don't like killing off my main characters.
Of course. Denise Sison asks, I'm interested to know what Gene thinks are some storytelling tropes that that were popular pre-pandemic that no longer hold up in today's times.
Oh man. Well, he's like okay, so I'm going to say that you may know that in the United States, we have some really wacky gun laws. And that's yeah, they're dumb. And there's a thing in the United States where a lot of people have so accepted the idea that they are an action hero and they can only solve problems with action hero solutions of shooting people. Part of the inspiration for writing May was just kind of to say that if you just keep on shooting people until there are no problems, you're probably the problem.
Yeah.
And the older sister, Annie, her solution is always to punch things. Her first solution is always to punch things. And it was kind of the part of the first half of the first volume, there's 2 volumes out so far, was May learning, at first trusting her sister, like, this world and I don't. I'm going to just let you punch things until the solution gets solved. And then realizing, oh, she never solves problems. She never solves problems. I've never seen her solve a problem. And then realizing I'm going to have to think things through if we're actually going to fix this.
We have a couple of questions that I think are tied together, from Chester Quizon and Jaco Miguel Magpayo. How difficult is it for creators to get the rights and ownership back of their works back once they sell it to the companies? Is it very costly? And since ownership is a conflict between some publishers and creators, is it ideal to self-publish your first works as a creator if you want full control of your work?
I'll just put it this way. When you're first breaking the industry, you have to do whatever you can to become professional and to make a living at it. Sell off, I'm talking about stories here, I'm not being literal. Don't sell off your own babies. Sell off anything else you can. Sell off your neighbor's stuff. If you have that chest of stuff from your grandfather, the treasured thing or whatever, the great treasure you're hidden in your house, don't sell that to the comic book company. Sell things you get from other places. Resell your neighbor's car or something like that. But whatever is your great treasure, hold on to that one. And then when you get the chance, do it. I'm also going to say that have fun with. Sometimes it turns out that the story that somebody thinks is their great story is not their great story.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the dumb disposable idea turns out to be the best thing they ever did.
Do you have an example of that?
Almost everything Stan Lee did in 1963.
That's true.
He thought he was going to be a great novelist or something like that in his dreams. But it turned out the thing he did, the disposable stuff he did, turned out to be the great stuff he did.
That's a very true thing, because Stan Lee is a pen name. For everyone in the audience, Stan Lee is a pen name. He used a pen name in comics because he didn't want his real name being used, because he was going to use that later for the Great American Novel, which he never did. Is it costly to get rights back?
Oh yeah. The thing is, a lot of the American companies now want. Almost nobody makes up, except for the YA market, the teenage market in the United States. No one in the American comics market, in the comic shop market, makes money on comics, and you make money by licensing it for something else later. And if somebody else gets the rights for that, then potentially it could be this giant franchise that becomes a movie series or a series on Netflix or something like that, where the big money is. And for you to get the rights to that, you're not buying the rights back to your comic book. You're buying the rights back to their dream of making a movie of it.
I think when I see something like May, Gene, I think that May not only looks like it would be more successful in a bookstore or for library reads rather than at a direct market comic. And I think it would also make a great TV show.
Yeah, it'd be nice. We'll see. I've
Not gonna ask you
a
about
long
it.
time ago. Yeah, a long time ago. We'll see. It hasn't happened yet, but
And then Cam is asking a question, not to play favorites, but which collaboration did you find most rewarding? Maybe one where your creative vision aligned, or one that resulted in a work that you're most proud of. And my follow-up question to that is working on May, because you do it end to end, more rewarding than whatever your answer to that is?
oh, I mean, well, okay. There's different ways of like taking the word reward. Like, what are the rewards you get? So like the most fun I have doing comics is drawing my own stories. But getting it's like some of the most rewarding stuff I've done is work, like the most rewarding thing I ever did, which is learning in comics and working with somebody who teaches me to look at comics differently. And in fact, the way I describe great art is not that it's necessarily the best crafted or the most beautiful or something like that. It's a story or a movie or a picture or a song that changes the way you look at the world. And working with someone like Archie Goodwin on a short story in the 90s, yeah, he changed how I looked at comic books by explaining to me how his story worked, and how, frankly, my first roughs I did showing him how I wanted to tell the story didn't work, because I was going a little bit for the Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee. Every scene is a poster,
Yeah.
and every scene is, Queen at full volume. And he's like, no, we're going to start off this story slow, and then we're going to build up. And it's like, and then he explained how everything was going to work and how I shouldn't use dramatic camera angles for the first few pages. And it's like, oh. And it's that contrast was like, oh, okay, I see how the story works. And then when I went crazy at the end, then it was more powerful. So that was very rewarding.
This is for the comic
learning
in
how
1995, right?
Oh yeah, it was a DC Showcase 95, number 11.
Number 11.
And the 95 is the year, 1995. So it's apostrophe 95. Also working with Alan Moore was a huge learning experience that way. And also Alan Moore with Zander Cannon, working with Brad Meltzer was a huge thing. And also working with Kelly Sue DeConnick, also very rewarding and also great learning experiences.
And they're different things each time.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's amazing. I am 54 years old now, and the amount of things I don't know about comics is just stunning. And the fact that I still have more things to learn, it's just amazing how much I can find out I don't know.
It is amazing and humbling to hear you say this, because one of the greatest comic book writers ever, Mark Waid, says you are in his top 5 collaborators. And for you to say that there's still so much you don't know, I think is inspiring, because it shows to everyone listening into this today, anyone who's trying to make a comic, that there is always something to learn. You're all, you never have it completely figured out.
Yeah. I mean, when you're working with a great writer, and Mark Waid is also one of my favorite people to work with, and he always teaches me stuff. He's going to, in some way, he's telling it. He's one of those people who's definitely not telling the story he thinks the reader expects, and he's always going to do something that different. He's always going to break the genre every story he does in some little way or some big way. That's how he does it, and I have so much admiration for how he does that. And when you come to if you're an artist working on his story, you have to relearn comics, because he's telling a different story than you've ever told before, or he's ever told before.
Exactly. My very last question, Gene. This is the Philippine International Comics Festival. This is something that I've been asking everyone who's actually been coming onto my show recently. And I know you're too young to have been aware of when it actually happened, but the Filipino invasion into American comics of 1972. What did you think about that? Did you have a favorite? How do you think that changed the landscape, and what do you feel about the whole thing?
Oh, I mean, honestly, at the time, I just thought they were Americans with Spanish last names and stuff, or things like that. So I just thought they were really, I thought they were really beautiful. Almost, they looked like, at the time, they looked like expensive commercial illustration by the top American commercial illustrators as opposed to comics illustrators. it was very beautiful work. It was they were holding up to a standard I hadn't expected. It was like there were so many American artists at the time who were copying Neil Adams, who had an American illustration influence style, but they were all copying Neil Adams. And I don't think there was Filipino artists who were like at the Neil Adams level, but they weren't copying Neil Adams. It was something different. It was a different point of view, and it brought something new. But I'm going to say, at the time, I liked cartoony because I was in grade school.
Of course.
So I was like, this is a really beautiful comic. I don't think it's for me because I'm 10 years old.
Yeah, I think that's a common. I think that's actually a common sentiment. It's like asked Mark Waid about it, and he said he was coming from Kurt Swan, so we actually didn't like it first, and came to like it later. I think if there are no more questions, I think that's about it for the for this webinar. I just want to ask you one last question before we go. For anybody, this is for everybody who's watching. Just a quick plug. Fill in the blank. If you like blank, you should read May.
It's a tough one. Okay. So one of my favorite novels when I was a kid was Wrinkle in Time. And if you like A Wrinkle in Time, you will love May.
There we go. Thank you, Gene. Much appreciated.
Thank you for inviting me. Oh, thank you for inviting me. But I am so sad. I'm not going to be able to eat Filipino food after this is over, after the session's over.